so much. Let's see here. Yes, thanks so much for having us today. It's certainly our pleasure. So if you are joining us for the first time, I'm Allison Scobber, Consolidated Planning Group. We put out a series of webinars on a pretty regular basis on topics surrounding special needs planning, transition, you name it. So we are happy to be back with you again today. Today's meeting is being recorded, and following today's meeting, you'll get an email with the recording and a copy of today's slides. Consolidated Planning Group, we are a holistic special needs financial planning firm. And so navigating these waters is something that I've done myself as a parent with kids with special needs, and I know that it's tough. And one of the things that comes up in almost every meeting that we have is school and education, problems with school, how things are working, paying for private school. There's so many different things that we hear on a pretty regular basis. So bottom line is you're not alone. From a housekeeping perspective today, we are in webinar mode, and that basically means that we can't see you and we can't hear you, but we do know you're there and we're glad you're here. We do want this to be as interactive as possible from a question perspective. So as we're going through the presentation today, if you have questions, we do ask that you just put those in the chat box, and I'm going to read those out to Jennifer. So having said that, we are excited to be partnering again with Shields Law Council for Special Needs. They're here in the Fort Bend County area and really serving all over the state of Texas. And so we're happy to have Jennifer Swanson with us, and she's going to be talking about making the most of your IEP team and ARD meeting, and she's going to be talking about the 3 essential tips. So having said that, I think you should have screen access, Jennifer, where you can forward your slides. And I would just like to thank you for being here with us today, and I would like to turn everything over to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's a privilege. Really excited to present. You're right. There, even in the best situation, there's a lot that anyone could learn or know about how to attend an IEP, or if you're from Texas, an ARD meeting. So here's our contact information. We are primarily a special needs law firm. Part of what we do is special education. So just being attorneys, our general disclaimer, this information doesn't and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, the information, the content, and the discussions are for informational purposes. Some information might not be the most up to date. The legal world is changing rapidly, and so if we reference other websites, or that's for your convenience, it's not necessarily an endorsement of those websites. So attorney legalese out of the way. Let's get into the meat of how to make the most of your team meeting. So the first tip we would give you is to gather all the relevant data. Okay, you want to go into this meeting, whether it's an annual, whether it's a review, a brief ARD, whatever it is, you want to go in completely up to date on what's going on with your child. So let's talk a little bit about that. One of the things that we encourage our clients to do is to at least annually make a request for your child's full educational file. So why would you do that? Why would you want to do that annually? You'll know what the file contains, right? You'll be sure that all the IEPs are present, the things from their cumulative folder, their benchmarks, all those sorts of things are there. You can catch mistakes. Maybe something's not accurate, or there's a file, there's a document in your child's file that doesn't belong to them. The sooner you're able to do that, the easier it is to fix the record, right? That's why we recommend every year. And most importantly, right, prior to an ARD meeting, an IEP team meeting, you're going to be fully informed. You're going to know what the committee knows. So as you know, as parents, or hopefully you know, parents are mandatory ARD committee members. You have to be there unless you refuse to show up. So you want to have the most up-to-date information that you can have. When it comes to requesting records, okay, so let's talk about this annual. You're going to put it on your calendar. My child's ARD meeting is in August, so I'm going to request in August or whatever. FERPA, the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act, requires that educational agencies and institutions, so your public school, comply with your request to provide those educational records at least not more than 45 days after the receipt of your request. So 45 days is a long time. That's why we tell you to request it prior to your ARD meeting, because if you request it prior to your ARD meeting, then your school needs to make it available to you before that ARD meeting. So that's one way to shorten the 45 days. Okay, well, that's the full educational file. What kinds of things might not be in that educational file at the time you request it? Your data from the teachers and the staff. So what does that look like? IEP progress reports should be part of the file, right? Those are going to go out to you, usually commiserate with report cards, right? If you look on your IEP goal, you'll see a place that designates IEP progress reports, and it tells you how often you're going to get them. Generally, it's commiserate with report card. So 9 weeks, 6 weeks. It can be shorter than that, but that's generally what you'll see, right? Those should be in the full educational file if they're being sent regularly. And that's really good information for you, right? You can look at the IEP goal and look at the progress coding. So, and see how much progress are they making toward their annual goal. And that's really good information. But something that's perhaps more information than that is the IEP data collection that the teacher or related service persons or staff members take to inform the progress reporting that they do for the IEP progress reports. That data collection you may need to get from the teacher directly. So what does that look like? Miss Speech Teacher, thank you so much. I hope you're doing well. We have an IEP meeting coming up. I noticed that you have, she seems to be making progress on her IEP goals. Could you provide me with your data collection before the ARD so I can have an opportunity to look at it in case I have questions, right? That's one way, right? You're going to get it from the service provider directly. Okay, what are some other types of records you're going to want? Ideally would be in the educational file, but again, different times of the year, you might have to get it from different people. Work samples, okay? What types of work samples would you be looking at in the record? Tests, okay? That's a broad term. It could be benchmarks, okay? Benchmarks, depending on the grade level in the class, are basically going to be ways to assess if the child or the children are making progress towards the mastery of the overall curriculum. Okay. Sometimes they're maybe once in the fall, once in the spring, but it depends, right? Common-based assessments or screeners. These are going to be smaller tests that might be given by a teacher on a regular basis, maybe unit tests. The screeners are going to be given at specific times during the year. And then on maybe a more intense level, again, depending on the age and grade level of your child, my favorite, BOY, MOY, and EOY. Okay, those are beginning, middle, and end of year data points. So and again, grade level specific. So let's just use the example of elementary, because elementary is what I taught. A lot of times this data is going to be tracking phonemic awareness, reading ability, math facts. And so you have for this particular data point, 3 data points, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And generally they line up side by side, and you can see, okay, they knew 12 letters in the beginning. Now they know 22 letters. Now they know all of their letters, and as an example, right? So these are all important data points that you're going to want to collect prior to your ARD meeting. Okay. What else are you going to want to review in your child's file? You're going to want to look at their most recent evaluations. Okay. So how are evaluations distinguished from tests, right? So an evaluation is a formal assessment that your school district would give to your child, approximately every 3 years, but perhaps more often or perhaps not as often, depending on your circumstance. But it's more formal. They're going to pull them into another room. They're going to give them a set of different protocols, different tests, and they're going to assess for big picture issues, achievement, cognitive development. They're going to look at adaptive behavior, all those terms that you're used to hearing when you come to what we call the 3-year reeval that you sometimes hear about. Okay. When was their last evaluation? Was it a year ago, 2 years, 3 years ago? Was it 6 years ago? You're going to want to look at that last evaluation and get some information about it. So why is that important? Okay. We like to use this example, right? Children are constantly growing. If you're buying your child more than one pair of shoes in a rolling, let's say 10-year period, then that just means that their feet are growing an awful lot, right? And that's kind of a joke. You're probably buying 10 pairs of shoes in 6 months. The same thing is happening with their brain. They're continuing to develop, make connections, grow, change, et cetera. So when you look at that evaluation, that snapshot of who they were a year ago, 2 years ago, so on, you want to think to yourself, how much have they changed? How much has changed for them? Have there been big life events? Changes in material changes in their IEP. So that's important to review prior to your ARD meeting, because you might be coming to this ARD meeting after reviewing all your data and your child's educational file, maybe thinking, maybe we need to update their evaluation, look at those formal data points and see where we are, right? So I have here to kind of, well, we'll start with the read trap. Okay, what does that mean? It sounds nefarious, but what it actually means is, well, let's back up. Before a school district is going to reevaluate your child, right? They're in special education, they have an IEP. That was a result of their initial evaluation and the resulting ARD committee decision to accept that evaluation and develop an IEP. Every evaluation after that is a re-evaluation, okay? So before you re-evaluate a child, you have to conduct a read, which is a review existing evaluation data, right? Four letters, review existing evaluation data. That's step one. Well, sometimes, and sometimes school districts will do that, or the ARD committee, let's say the ARD committee of which you are a part, will review that and say, not a whole lot has changed. We don't need to update the evaluations, okay? So what could potentially happen is that your child could go not just 3 years without an evaluation, but 6 years or 9 years. And because every time you meet and you say, nothing's really changed, and you continue on and don't really reevaluate, but that read that you did, the review of existing evaluation data in the ARD meeting, becomes the new evaluation date, okay? We think you should think that through. We think that, to use my tennis shoe analogy, it's important to update evaluations to get more data points. Everything in special education is data driven, right? And so that's something to think about when you come to your ARD meeting, having reviewed your educational file, your benchmarks, your data points, the data collection. Is it time to update the formal assessments? The other kind of trap we talk about is sometimes there's a misunderstanding that the only purpose of an evaluation is to determine if a child qualifies for special education, and that's not true. That's one component, obviously, it's one of the main purposes of the initial, but it also informs the IEP, right? So if the ARD committee suggests, well, mom, dad, we know they're going to qualify, why would we worry about this? Then the answer is, well, they've changed a lot. I noticed, referencing their data, all these different things. I'd like to update their evaluations because I'd like to be more informed about how to talk about their education in this meeting, right? So when does a district have to conduct that evaluation, have to get more data from a formal data? They have to do it, or they must do it, if they determine educational related service needs, including improved academic achievement and functional performance, warrant the reevaluation, or if the parent or teacher requests it. So that's something to think about prior to your ARD meeting. You're getting all that data. Do we need more information? Okay, so you are fully prepared. You've reviewed all the data. You know whether you're going to ask for an evaluation. You know where your child is now. What do you do next? What's the next tip to prepare for your ARD? The next tip is to prepare your own PLAF statement. So what is the PLAF? Very awkward acronym for present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. When we talk about the PLAF statement, the way that, let's go through the legal definition and let's talk about how to get in the weeds about it, right? The statute says the IEP must include a statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. That statement needs to include how the child's disability affects their involvement and progress in general education, And then there's a step for children, for preschool children, as appropriate, how their disability affects their participation in appropriate activities, right? So how their disability affects their progress in general education. So the way I was trained as a teacher to write the PLAF statement is that it needs to pass the stranger test. Okay, what does that mean? It means that if I'm a brand new teacher in a district and I've never met your child, but I'm going to be providing their provision of their IEP, their services, should be able to pick up the IEP, go to the PLAF section and understand, okay, this is who the child is. This is what they need, challenge, strengths, weaknesses, support services, and I should be able to provide that IEP based off the PLAF statement. So you're going to draft your own PLAF statement from your perspective, your record, what you know. The stranger test, I got ahead of myself. So when you review the old PLAF statement, ask yourself, does this IEP accurately reflect my child? Is this my child 7 days a week? Is this a good day, a bad day? You want to look at all of that. Does the previous PLAF repeat from year to year? Is it kind of repetitive? They knew X number of math facts this year. Now they know X number of math facts this year. Math facts are important, but what's the critical issue in math? What's the main concern, right? So when you prepare for your ARD, you want to draft that statement yourself. Who is your kiddo? How do you view their strengths and weaknesses? You've reviewed their data and their evaluations. What struck out to you? What are your concerns about their benchmark testing or their progress on IEP goals? Do you have your own observations or behavior interventions that you use at home? Maybe if you have a kiddo with some challenges that you think the school should know about. How do you handle fill in the blank, right? You want to draft your own PLAF statement, including a list of your current concerns for their education going forward, concerns for progress or lack of progress. Did they exceed their IEP goals? So maybe you want to work toward slightly more challenging goals. Were there issues and they didn't achieve every benchmark of their goal, or they didn't attain the mastery? What happened? You want to fully prepare this statement prior to the ARD meeting. Okay, so you've reviewed the data, you're ready to go talk, you've prepared and you're ready to talk about your child educationally, functionally, etc. Tip number 3 is to get comfortable with disagreement. Now, this sounds like it might be negative, but I actually don't think that it is. I think that when a committee comes together to discuss an important topic, you have to be okay with disagreement. That's how we grow, right? That's how we are able to make progress. So you want to get comfortable with disagreement. So let's talk about what disagreement is, okay? A disagreement would happen at the end of an ARD meeting. So if, and this is for Texas, if a parent disagrees with the ARD committee's proposed changes to the child services or program in their IEP, then they may request an ARD meeting recess of up to 10 days. So what does this look like? Okay. You're discussing the IEP, you have you believe that your child needs X service, and the school district believes that they need Y service, or some combination in between. You have a meaningful discussion, you hear each other out, and then at the end, you still believe that your child needs X service. So at that moment, you can't agree to the IEP because you disagree with the services. So what you do is on the signature page, just like you would anyway, you would sign your name and you would check disagree after discussing your disagreements. The disagreement is your right. It is your right as an ARD committee member to disagree. And in fact, the other ARD committee members have the right to disagree as well. When a parent disagrees, then it triggers some additional duties for the school and the ARD committee. Okay, so there's a 10-day break between the disagreement ARD and what we call the reconvene ARD. And during that meeting recess, the parents in the school consider alternatives. Is there an alternative to service X and service Y? Would service Z make more sense? Gather additional data. Is there something we're not looking at that would inform this? That data can come from the parents. Often it comes from the school, right? The school generally has access to that, but you might have something else you want to propose or present. Further documentation. or obtaining additional resource people. Maybe there's someone who could speak to service X or service Y who needs to come to the ARD meeting. Okay. And then the idea after doing all of that is to come back to ARD to reach mutual agreement. Okay. So the idea behind disagreement in and of itself is just a natural process, a natural committee process, trying to work out what's best for the child. Committee members have to be willing to disagree, and that includes the parent who is an ARD committee member. Now, if that agreement can't be worked out, if there's something that exceeds the parameters of this webinar, if there's a change in the IEP, you don't want, or a disagreement that can't be solved at the ARD table, then of course it's your right to consider or to file a due process hearing request. That is more within the purview. You would want to speak with a legal representative or seek legal help for that. But I include it here because the reality is that at the 10-day reconvene, the IEP can be implemented over the parent's objection, right? And that's because the school district has the duty to provide a FAPE. And that's why it's included here. But disagreement on its face is not actually a negative process. So
we have a little question that I'd like to bring up. So we have I'm a little bit confused on the PLAF statement. My son is 5 and we have only had one ARD meeting. I don't remember them asking me about the PLAF. Should they have, or is it a parental responsibility, and what do I do now? And it further says, I received report cards, but no IEP progress reports. Is this common?
Okay, so let's go back to the PLAF statement. So did I move the screen? I'm sorry. So let's go back to the PLAF statement. So the PLAF statement should include input from the parent. How different districts go about doing that kind of varies. My one thought would be, prior to your ARD, and this isn't necessarily something that's your job to do, but it's something that you could do if you wanted to, something that you could do, okay, is reach out to the school district and say, we have an ARD coming up on XYZ date. If there's a draft of the IEP, could you send it to me so that I can review and provide input? Okay, that's kind of a best practice. If the school district has a draft of the IEP, then they need to share it with you prior to the ARD. If they don't have a draft, then they can't share it with you. But that's a point at which you could provide input. As far as what to do now, I would say you review the IEP. If you still have concerns with it, you as a parent have the right to call an ARD meeting to address those concerns. That's certainly something that you could do. And then with regard to IEP progress reports, I think that's something that you want to follow up with the diagnostician, the teacher, as quickly as possible, because whatever is on your IEP for how often those are supposed to come to you, that is when they're supposed to come to you. Like I said, the general practice is that they're sent out commensurate with report cards. You get your report card, you get your IEP progress. But there are some cases where the ARD committee and the parent decide, we're going to actually do this more often, right? So instead of 9 weeks, we're going to do it every 3 weeks. So that's a follow-up with your school district to say, hey, I just wanted to let you know I didn't get them. I really need them to be informed about my child's education. And then obviously making sure you get them.
And so just before you move on, I would like you to address, because, we talk to families all the time, how can they go about requesting these things, and truly like positioning themselves as partnering with the school? Because, the truth is the schools, they're overworked, they're underpaid, they're understaffed. There's a lot of things going on, and the law is the law, and we're clear on that. But, honestly, in these adversarial relationships, it seems like the kids suffer. Nobody wins. The kids definitely don't win. So do you have any advice? And some people have like big stress. Some parents have big stress about going into these meetings or asking for things or making people mad or, those types of things. So could you just kind of give any advice on that?
So I think, sure, if these types of issues didn't become adversarial, I wouldn't have a job, right? That's the reality. But I think in most cases, good communication solves a lot of problems. And so you're right, the law is the law. And the reality is a lot of these duties are the job of the school. but they're human beings and they err or they get busy. And so it's not the parent's job in most of these cases. But for the parent who wants to be proactive, then keeping that communication open is what's going to make that difference, right? Marking on your calendar the request of the educational records, a parent does have to do that. That's not on the duty. That's not a school's duty. So you want to mark that on your calendar. You send an email that explains what you're asking for. And by the way, my ARD date is whatever it is, and I'd like to review them before the ARD. Can I please have a copy, right? Or can I please have access to them? But as far as issues like the school's not reaching out to you for input at the ARD meeting. Well, that's the importance of disagreement. Let me kind of go back to that, right? Again, it's not necessarily a negative thing, but if I show up to an ARD meeting for my child and I haven't gotten a copy of the IEP and they make these proposals, they've changed the PLAF statement materially, the goals are different, I haven't seen any data collection, I'm going to listen to what they say, but it's this, you wouldn't sign a contract you haven't read, right? So you listen, you ask a lot of questions, and then you say, I haven't had an opportunity to review this. It's really difficult for me to make a decision in an hour. I'd like to take this information and review. I'm going to have to disagree it today. I'm going to review it and let's come back to the table after I have a chance to talk, to have a meaningful, to participate meaningfully. And that can be frustrating, I think, but also I think, most school staff members are parents. A lot of people are parents. I think they would understand. You need time to think about. This is a year. If we're talking about an annual, this is an entire year of educational decisions that we're making in an hour, and you haven't seen the document. So I think keeping that communication open, I want to review it. And the reality is, if you take the documentation and you review it and you think, you know what, I agree with everything that's in here, you don't have to come back to the 10-day. You can just let them know, yeah, this looks great. I agree with this. Let's not make another meeting date. But that committee, that disagreement aspect is an important part of the committee process.
Thank you for sidebarring on that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Okay. So that is the end of my presentation. I think, Allison, this is a screen I'm gonna.
Sure. You are quick. We've slated from 12 to 1, so clearly we're not going to go to 1 o'clock today. But so if you do have additional questions, do put them in your chat box. I do see that we have it says, what is the educational file? Again, that's just the complete educational record for the student. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yes. And it can be pretty extensive. It does not just, it can include obviously the IEPs, work samples, the cumulative folder, but it also includes any personally identifiable information about your child or the parents. So that would be addresses, social security numbers. It can be a pretty extensive file.
So, and I just want to kind of go a little bit further. So clearly you guys, you're with the Shields Law out of Katy. So if we have families that have, that they've been struggling in this department, and that's why they're here. Some families may have a new diagnosis and they're trying to learn the ropes. Maybe they have a young child, in earlier grades. But if we have families that are, running into brick walls, or their services are not being provided as laid out in their IEP, when do they need intervention? And do lawyers go to ARD meetings? Is it necessary for a family to take an educational advocate or an educational attorney into the ARD meeting, or does that set the stage for them to be on guard?
I think that depends. So it's not necessary. That's not the idea behind the process. I think at the point at which you're choosing to take an advocate or an attorney, I think that decision has to be made on an individualized basis, right? So as a law firm, we go to ARD meetings, but we don't go to all ARD meetings. If we want to go for to put the client in the best position. If we think our showing up is going to be inflammatory, then that's not going to achieve the goal, right? Alternatively, if it's just there's some communication issues, we can all work through it, and find a solution, then it makes sense. And that's true for I think any situation, but for us, that's a client specific decision. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, for sure. And so, Someone said, it's my understanding that the ARD meetings happen every 3 years unless otherwise requested. Is that correct? And how does that work in terms of our children moving up from grade to grade? Are the new teachers just updated on the IEP and just brought up to speed with the child?
That is not correct at all. Annual by statute, the ARD meetings must be held at least annually, at least once per year, but can be held more frequently if there's a concern, if a material change, right? If a parent has a concern, a child's not making progress, there's a new event that's happened, a new diagnosis, a new change, any reason a parent could call a review ARD, but the ARD meetings must happen at least annually. The 3 years that you hear a lot of times has to do with the evaluation. So the statute says not more than 3 years. So the district can't go more than 3 years without a reevaluation. But that's the longest they can go. You can request a new evaluation annually every year, or less than that if you and the school district agree to evaluate in less than a year, which isn't common. But I would be super concerned if an ARD meeting hadn't happened in a year.
Okay, so for parents, where is it that they read their rights under? Is it under IDEA, where they read their rights for ARDs and IEPs and like the steps and things like that? Can you put a website in there where they can check that out? I don't know if you have that handy.
I don't have a website. So in Texas, parents get a copy of the Notice of Procedural Safeguards. You can type that into Google and get the most recent copy, and that's going to outline a lot of your rights, not all of them, but a lot of them. There's also TEA puts out an ARD guide that parents can also get for free offline. There's Rights Law is a very common website that parents use. Rights Law, he's not a Texas attorney, but he's a special education attorney. And there's some topics on there that sometimes parents find helpful. And then Disability Rights Texas, obviously based in Texas, does have some guides that they put out that are free and available on their website.
What recommendations do you have regarding help with being around neurotypical peers that helps them make progress, even if they never achieve grade level?
So I think this is kind of a least restrictive
environment.
Sorry, least restrictive. I'm trying to figure out how to answer this. The question is, where is your child going to make the most progress? And it doesn't have to be tied to grade level achievement. In fact, it really shouldn't, because when we're measuring, especially IEP progress, we're measuring our child against our child, right? Not against neurotypical peers. So, and this is not something that is reasonable minds can differ. But if your child is in general education, making progress on their IEP and making progress socially, but not on grade level, then they're making progress. And that may be their LRE. Does that distinction make a difference? On the other hand, if they're in general education, they're not on grade level and they're not making progress on their IEP, then general education may not be their least restrictive environment. It's not, the question is, where are they going to make the most progress? Hopefully that was.
Sure. So we have somebody else that says, I was understanding that the evaluation is every 3 years, if not otherwise requested, but meetings must be annually at the minimum. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Annual.
Okay.
IEP team must meet at least annually, at least once a year.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so a couple of other things that we've heard in and around Texas circles. So let's say that we do have a child. You know, we have worked with a lot of families, and their children have really, really struggled with the pandemic and online learning and things like that. There's a lot of children with disabilities that are, the online learning portal is not really working that great for them. Some of them are back to school, some of them are not. But in the event that, we've had all this communication, we're back and forth, we've got all our documents in place, everything, but the bottom line is our children are not meeting their goals, they're failing miserably, we're not making progress. What options are there? I've heard of certain districts like paying for private school. Or I guess what I want you to do is address when and how that works, because I think it's something that we hear in our parent circles all the time of when somehow we see that kids are going to a private school and somehow the district or the state is paying for that.
So every child within their school district is owed a free, appropriate public education as defined by their IEP. What is appropriate is going to be dependent on the individual child. If a school district cannot provide, the acronym is FAPE, a free, appropriate public education, then they're supposed to pay someone else to do it. Where that differs is the question of can they? And most of the time the school districts believe and perhaps can provide a FAPE, and parents look at it. It comes down honestly to a legal question. Generally, private placement happens in the context of litigation. That's not always true. Sometimes districts will make the decision with the parent to place a child privately or in a non-public school because that they've determined that those are those kiddos' needs, and they do that by ARD committee. That does happen, but otherwise, generally, you see it through litigation, through a differing of opinion about the provision of FAPE. So it's not something that's really easy to get. It's a very high bar to prove that a school district can't provide a FAPE, and then there's actually quite a bit of other analysis that goes into it. So,
okay. So thanks for answering that. So let's say in that example that we have a child that's going to a private school, and we're considering enrolling the child into the public school, but we would like them to be evaluated by the public school first and determine what it is that the school is going to do for the child before we pull them from a private school. But then when we contact the school says enroll them, and then we'll do the assessments. Is that a thing? What do people do if that's a situation that they've found themselves in?
So there's a little bit of nuance to the question, and some of it depends on where the kiddo lives in relationship to the school district, right? Because child find, which is the school district's ongoing duty to locate, identify, and provide special education to any child in need of it in their district, extends not just to children in public school, but to children in private school, children who are homeless, children who are migrant, children who are in hospitals. So that's a pretty big duty, right? But it's specific to the children within their school district. So sometimes what you'll see is I live in X school district, but my private school is in Y school district. And I think maybe that's where sometimes there's obviously, like I said, this is a nuanced question. But as far as what parents can do is to keep that communication open, right? This is when we're planning to return. These are the, here's our disability conditions. Here's some information. We'd like to request a full individual evaluation. We can make the child available. I think at the point at which there's not a willingness to collaborate, that's when I would consider reaching out to an attorney, because it's going to be specific to that individual situation, if that makes sense.
For sure. April mentioned that that VRCs are able to attend. So that's the vocational rehab counselors. So if your child is signed up for vocational rehab, they've got programs for ages 14 to 22. Your VRC is able to attend a ARD meeting, providing individual services to help with the IPE, which is basically the plan in place with VR to help your student with the disability. So that is a great point, April. Thank you for bringing that up. We have another question. Do parents have the right to request an evaluation for dyslexia or reading differences? We hear apraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia. There's all these terms that are thrown around pretty regularly. So can we just request an evaluation in that example?
Yes, you can go to the ARD committee and request new evaluations. So again, there's some nuance to it, right? If it's been less than a year, you and the school district have to agree. And some of this, let me just put a caveat, some of this is subject to the individual facts, right? There may be other issues if they've been previously evaluated, but go to the ARD committee and request. And then if the ARD committee disagrees, then they have to give you prior written notice and explain why they don't think that taking that action is going to make sense. And then at that point, if you still continue to disagree, that's where you're going to look for probably legal help to understand your rights and look for a path forward. But you can request evaluations in an ARD meeting. Like, that's the correct venue to request those evaluations.
For sure. So what if the evaluations that they're suggesting, like, you know, you've done a little bit of homework as a parent, and you know there's certain testing or certain things that need to happen, but they're not really offering that. How do you request additional, like, if what they're offering doesn't seem to be in line with the needs, do we have a leg to stand on to request more specific assessments?
So the way that the language reads is all areas of suspected disability. So if there's an evaluation that if there's a suspected area of disability and the district isn't offering to evaluate for that suspected area, then I kind of actually go back to what I said before. You want to go to the ARD committee, make the request, let them give you prior written notice. And then at that point, you want to look at potentially at legal options. I mean, as far as a leg to stand on, the parent has the right to request the evaluation, and the evaluation must be in all areas of suspected disability. Beyond that, it's going to be on an individual basis to figure out what the resistance is or why if there's a disconnect, right? I don't unfortunately have one path forward.
Let me take it a step further, Jennifer. What if, for instance, I'm a parent and I have outside testing. I am crystal clear on what my child's disabilities are and their deficits. And even in that testing, they said these are the supports that the child needs, what have you. And then because the school does their own testing, we all know how that works, then they do the testing and their testing doesn't measure up or add up or doesn't say any of the things that our outside testing does. How do we address that? Because that's actually something that is very common. I mean, we see this pretty frequently, especially in Fort Bend County. I see a lot of parents, a lot of parents have had testing before their kids ever even went to kindergarten. And a lot of parents want to know for themselves, and they don't want to rely on a test that's free done by the district for that to determine their child's education path. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I guess two things. Let's start with the outside testing, right? That's great for parents who have it. It's very informative. It gives them the information that they need, and if they take that testing and it matches up with the schools, then it helps to confirm. But to your point, sometimes they're different, right? So the first thing you want to do if you want the school to consider it is to provide it to the district, let them review it, ask them to consider it. That's all they have to do. They have to consider it. They can talk about it in an ARD meeting, but ultimately they don't have to accept that evaluation data. So let's say that happens. We're sorry, we're not going to accept this amazing evaluation that you have. We want to do our own testing. They do their own testing and they come back with something completely opposite of what you found. So you clearly agree with your evaluation, or you wouldn't have provided it, and you disagree with theirs. So at this point, the next step would be you disagree with the evaluation and send them an email saying, I disagree with your evaluation and I'd like to request an independent educational evaluation. Have them send you their criteria, find another independent evaluator, vet them very carefully, make sure that they're in alignment with your values and you are comfortable with the way they're going to assess, and get a third report. Again, it is not a panacea, but again, you take that report will be provided to the ARD committee. They will consider it. It's more data points. So if your evaluation and the IEE say similar things, then that helps you to make the argument for the supports and services that you need in the ARD committee. If the ARD committee, if it continues to be a standstill, then you want to look at the notice of procedural safeguards to look at next steps for how to essentially take it beyond the ARD committee.
So essentially, if you've had outside testing and there's a definitive diagnosis, the school doesn't necessarily have to accept that. You can request that they review it and see if they'll accept it, but they may want to do their own evaluations or their own assessments before they provide services for that, specific deficit or disability, what have you. So basically, from the chat box, if you've had an evaluation at 3 years, 9 years, 10 years. And you've had diagnoses. So basically, I think, Jennifer, your takeaway is she needs to submit what she has proving those diagnoses, see if they'll accept that, and if not, request in writing an assessment for specifically for that diagnosis or what have you.
So anything that you want the ARD committee to consider, you want to give it to them ahead of time, or give it to them and say, this is what we found. We believe this to be true. We'd like you to consider it. I have seen ARD committees accept outside evaluations. It's not something that they can't do. It's just something that they generally don't. They usually want to do their own testing. But that's the starting point. You have a new diagnosis, new information, you provide it to the ARD committee so that they can consider it and discuss it and either decide if they're going to accept it or do their own evaluation.
Okay, so let's talk about timelines. One of the things that Jennifer has said over and over again is communicate in writing. So that you don't have to send a certified letter in FedEx or whatever, but communicate in writing and communicate by email, have a paper trail, because when you start looking at the guidelines, there's timelines of when they have to, how long they have to respond, from the time they respond, how long do they have to schedule assessments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to have like kind of a timestamp of the communications. So that is very, very important. So that like the little casual mention to the teacher that you'd like to schedule the ARD is not cutting it, or even the casual mention in the office or something like that. So definitely in writing. Is that right?
Absolutely. And absolutely. It does a couple of things, right? It's a notice, it's written, there's a record of it, but it also, so the school district knows, they've got an email, I've got to respond to it. It's in writing. There's proof that I sent it, but then it also helps you as a parent remember who you spoke to when, right? That's another reason.
Right. So what's the timeline? So if you've requested this, what is their timeline to act?
So people like to talk about the timelines, and they are important, but let's kind of start with the first one. The first timeline is the initial evaluation timeline. So you request in writing to have an evaluation. They have 45 school days to complete the evaluation, and then 30 days to hold the ARD. For most parents, that's really frustrating, because if you sit down with a calendar, you request that in August, you're looking at having your initial ARD in late October, November, maybe even December, right? Depending on when you ask. For a reevaluation, you want to go back, you want to call an ARD and request the reevaluation in the ARD, because if they're going to reevaluate, then they have to do the read first, right? So, and then they have to go through the review of existing evaluation data and then talk about what evaluations they're going to do. Because let's say they've done a full evaluation, you have a concern about dyslexia. They never assessed for dyslexia before. This is a hypothetical. They never assessed for dyslexia before. It may not make sense to redo adaptive behavior. Let's just focus on dyslexia, right? So you want to, that process you're going to do through the ARD process, if it's a reevaluation. And then,
so I would just like to comment that it's go time for you parents out there that are having issues that you need updates and things like that, because it's March 1st. And so 45 days, it takes it to April 15th. We're getting close, basically getting close to the end of the school year. So getting things going and having things teed up and ready to go for the next school year, I would say it's probably go time. You agree with that, Jennifer?
Absolutely. This is a good time to kind of assess. I mean, it's about we're close to spring break, right? I can't actually believe that, but we're close to spring break. So end of year exams are going to be coming up after spring break, planning for the fall. This is a really good time to start assessing how's the year going. Are they going to meet their goals? And what do they need for the next year? Especially if you've got a kiddo who's about to change campuses. That's a huge transition. The one that we usually hear is the elementary to junior high, or intermediate to junior high, or whatever the transition. Something about going to junior high is hard for everybody. So if you have a kiddo, headed to another campus, it's a good time to start that conversation, to look at all the stuff we've talked about. And then also, see if there's a campus tour you can do, or can we meet the new staff? Passing periods are kind of a shock to the system, right? Block schedules can be a shock to the system, all those kinds of changes. So yes, absolutely. This is the time to start thinking about that.
So, could you tell everyone where they can find a list of the timelines? Like what guide is it that you mentioned earlier that they could see what the rules are, like the rules of engagement for this process?
So the notice of procedural safeguards has a lot of the parent rights, and then the guide to the ARD process, I think, can be really helpful. But as for like a timeline that parents have access to, I think it's The Education Service Center 18, I think it's ESC 18, puts out a framework that kind of lists out the law. If you type in framework or IDEA framework into Google, that website will come up. It's available to parents. Like I said, I think it's Education Service Center 18 that created it. And I think that might be what they're looking for, just a visual to help them walk through some of the statutory language and the timelines.
For sure, for sure. Okay, last question. Is there a timeline for READ, REED?
The review of existing evaluation data. There's not necessarily a timeline. This is just a step that the ARD committee takes when they're considering an evaluation. So I think of the reevaluation process as like the Texas two-step, which that's not a thing, but that's my thing. The first step is the read. First we read, then we reevaluate. But sometimes they stop at the read step. So, and that might be appropriate, but you want to know if that's appropriate for your kiddo.
For sure. Well, so, a couple of things that I would like to say is, first of all, I'm glad you guys are here today, because the thing is this is a big deal, and losing a year, losing 9 months, losing 2 years, as far as the educational goals and meeting benchmarks and things like that really can make a big difference in the success of your student. And so, the assumption that they're just doing everything that is supposed to be done is not always a fair assumption. And it's not fair to assume that it's not being done either. But I think it does require, close assessment. But so you guys are definitely not alone here in your struggles and your quest to understand and, kind of how to navigate this. If you're new to this or if you're having issues, you're definitely not alone. So you'll definitely be in good hands with Jennifer Swanson should you have, issues that have escalated to a kind of a legal level, or you have legal questions surrounding this, or you feel like you need representation going into your ARD or those types of things. Jennifer is going to be your girl for that, and you can certainly reach out. This slide's been up for a really long time, and this is just, if you've attended our webinars in the past, this is just some things that should be on your special needs planning radar. Consolidated Planning Group has webinars on every single one of these topics, and you can go to the next slide. We have webinars on these topics, and they live on our YouTube channel, and they're all free. So if you have missed some of these topics in the past, things like guardianship, SSI, Medicaid, special needs trust, working with the Texas Workforce Commission, Vocational Rehab, the Summer Earn and Learn program, pre-employment training services for sure. We have webinars on all of those topics. So definitely check those out at your convenience. And we've got our contact information here. If you guys need help with the planning process, we are nationally certified as Social Security advisors. We can help do those Social Security analysis and help navigate the red tape of obtaining SSI and Medicaid for your transitioning students that are turning 18. So it's as always, it's a pleasure to be with you all today. April, thank you for hosting us today, and Jennifer, thank you for your awesome and great information. It was really, really wonderful and very, very timely. Like I said, with the date of March 1st, this is a very timely webinar, and I'm thankful for the information.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.